可汗教授刚刚给我们解释了犹太人都很聪明的秘密，那我不得不说，犹太人还是非常聪明的呢。那可汗教授可否再给我们透露下犹太人是懂富有的吗？
So, of course, that's a myth, but I do hear it a lot, and I hear it when I go to China as well. There are rich Jews, just like there are rich Chinese and rich Americans or Europeans. But the myth comes from somewhere, and that's what I can try to address here. There's a historical background to it, that in Europe, Jews were subject to restrictions, to economic restrictions. So, for example, they were not able to own land, and therefore, if Jews had some success and were able to accumulate some wealth, they could not put it in land, and they had to hold it in currency. And that's more visible. So people who were envious of the Jews said, oh, the Jews, they have bags of cash in their house. But Jews, therefore, went into money lending, and they started the first banks. But that was the way that they could preserve their wealth if they were successful. So the first banks started because Jews had that money, and they would lend it to others to start enterprise. In the United States, over the last 100 years, many Jews came to this country as refugees from Europe with very little, and they were able to be successful. The very famous ones are the, fabulously wealthy ones, but there are many Jews who are comfortable and who've made a good living, and I think I can try to explain a little bit about how they succeeded. And there are two factors, I think, that are worth noting. Number one, those Jews who are successful are the ones that invested for the long term. So that means that if a Jewish person started a business and he made some money, he didn't go run and spend the money right away and buy a nice car or go on a nice vacation, but he would reinvest the money in his business to make it a stronger business and also to teach his children to be entrepreneurs like him. And that's the way they built the business step by step with patience for the long term. And in fact, there's a story in the Talmud, which is Jewish wisdom, about an old man that was seen planting little trees, little saplings that bear fruit. And someone said to him, "Old man, why are you planting those trees? You're not going to see the fruits. It'll take years." And he answered and said, "When I was young, I came into the world with a lot of fruit trees, and people had planted them before me, and I am planting them for my children and my grandchildren." And that's looking at taking a long view. Now, the second point is the centrality of education. And the single most important and the single greatest investment that Jewish people make is in education for themselves and their children. And in a Jewish family, the greatest expenditure is not on fancy cars or on fancy vacations, but it's education. It starts with Xiaoshue and Zhongshue and Dashue. That is what Jewish people prize, education, and educated people typically have a greater rate of success than uneducated people. And so it's those two factors, investing for the long term and an emphasis on education, that I think were keys to success in the United States. So you may have heard recently about people who made a lot of money in the stock market. And Bitcoin, for example, is very famous, that people made thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So my kids come to me and say, "Dad, let's invest in Bitcoin or in the stock market." And I tell them that the most important investment that you can make is in your education. If you study hard, that will bring a better return for your success in the future. And let me share with you my own personal experience from my father, Mr. Joseph B. Cohen, who passed away a little more than 5 years ago. And I still miss my dad, even though he was 90 years old when he died at a ripe old age, but he taught me a great deal. Now, he was born in 1924 in Poland. And in 1935, when he was about 10 years old, the family moved to Israel. And they were very poor in Israel. It was in the time of the Depression. It was a family with 8 children, and beyond 9th grade, my father could not go to school. They didn't have enough money. All of the children had to work to support the family. So my dad worked in the day, but he was motivated and took a correspondence course with the University of London in order to complete high school. And then he continued to work. He had to go to the Israeli army in 1947. He fought in the War of Independence. And then he continued to work and then went to England for university. And he studied accounting in England in the 1950s. And then he came to the United States and again studied. And all of this time he had to work during the day as an accountant and then study at night. And finally, in the 1970s, after studying and after working, he started his own firm in accounting and in business consulting. And he was successful in his firm, number one, because of his education, and number two, because he dedicated himself to his clients. He never took shortcuts. And he didn't retire until he was 87 years old, because he loved his work, he found it challenging, and he found it fulfilling. He wanted me to take over his firm, and he wanted me to study accounting. He was a little bit disappointed that I went into scholarship and Jewish studies as a professor, but when I started publishing my books, he was very proud of that. And when I became a dean in the administration and I worked on budgets and financial planning, he was especially proud because we worked together. And he saw our 2 oldest children go to university, and he was super proud of them. My eldest daughter is now a doctor, and my second child is a son, and he's a business consultant, just like my father. My father did not live to see them graduate university, but he had a long vision, and he planted the trees, and he knew, he was confident that the fruits would come forth in the next generation.
您父亲的故事，还有犹太商业成功的故事，都是非常具有启发性的，包括对于我们在美国的留学生而言，都是很重要的成功楷模。我不得不说，也是想向您学习有关，我们必须要有耐心，而且要长期投资。